The topic is penetrating this world illusion with Vedanta tools. Now, one thing in Advaita Vedanta many people have a problem with is this idea that the world is an illusion. So what's that all about? And how do we understand it and how do we experience it? That's what we're going to talk about. I really liked that meditation, which was done by Swami Atmarupananda ji. Do you remember that relaxing and focusing on the sensations of the body till you notice that it's just a mass of sensations floating in your awareness, in you, the awareness. So is the body anything apart from sensations in awareness? Then he goes on further to say that, 1 second. If you remember the instructions, that is it true that there's this vast universe, in that there is something called the body, and in the body is the mind, and in the mind is this little bit of consciousness called the self? Or is it the other way around? In the vast field of awareness, there appears the mind, and in the mind appears this mass of sensations called the body, and through that we have experiences of the world. It's the other way around, an ocean of awareness in which the mind appears, in which the body appears, and through that we experience a material world. So instead of just thinking of it as an exercise in meditation, Advaita Vedanta actually takes it as a fact, as in fact, the right way of looking at this world, right way of looking at the body, and right way of looking at ourselves. Advaita Vedanta says you actually are an ocean of consciousness, and there's only one ocean of consciousness, and that's what you are. All of us are that, one ocean of consciousness, in which appear individual minds, bodies, and the shared external universe. Further, if you follow this carefully, if I am awareness, and in me the awareness appears a mass of sensation which I call the body, is that mass of sensation anything other than awareness? Ask yourself the question, if I were not awareness, would these sensations appear at all? Of course not. To whom would they appear? Where would they appear? Sensations are nothing but experiences in awareness. Sensation, when you feel the body, a little ache there, a little sensation of coolness or warmness somewhere, a little sensation of pressure. This is how we sense the body unless you're looking at it. When you close your eyes, you feel a mass of little sensations all around. Those sensations are nothing apart from consciousness. A huge claim is being made that whatever we experience appears in consciousness and is nothing apart from consciousness, and is indeed, in fact, nothing other than consciousness. Vedanta would put it this way: it is consciousness alone with names and forms and functions. You, the consciousness, you appear as your own universe. External universe, physical universe, mental universe, all of them are appearances in consciousness, which you are. So we're going to think about this together a little while, and then open up to Q&A before we end the session. So there's a story which I like very much, which illustrates this fact. The story is of the princess of Kashi, which I have shared a number of times, which I heard from monks in the Himalayas. Some of you have heard the story. The story is, it's a very cute story. It goes this way. In ancient India, in a kingdom, in the court, there was a play. A play was staged, and in the play at the royal court, one of the characters was the princess of Kashi. It was a little girl, the princess, and somebody had to play that role. Who would play the role? It so happened that the prince in that kingdom was a little boy, 5 years old, and the queen said, "Dress him up as a princess. He can be the princess of Kashi." So they dressed him up as a princess, And he was the Princess of Kashi. I'm sure he didn't have too many lines to speak. And he looked so cute that his mother, the queen, said, call the royal painter. These days they would have just taken a selfie or something with him. But call the royal painter and paint him in this dress. So the royal painter was called, and he painted a portrait of the prince dressed as the Princess of Kashi and titled it The Princess of Kashi, dated so and so. Now, over the years, the prince grew up. 15 years later, he was this young prince and getting ready to assume the kingship and so on and so forth. One day, he was exploring the palace, the old rooms in the palace, and in a cellar, he came across this old painting, and he wiped the dust of the painting and he saw the Princess of Kashi. And he looked at the date 15 years ago. I thought, this princess, she must be my age now. And he fell in love with her. And he said, if I don't marry this princess, I'll never be happy again. And he couldn't tell his parents, he was shy, but his parents noticed that the prince was not paying attention to his studies and his all the things that you need to learn to be a prince. And they were worried, but he wouldn't tell anything to them. Finally, this wise old minister comes to him and takes him aside and says, Prince, what ails you? What is in your hearts? You can tell me freely, you can talk to me freely. And the prince said, well, I'm in love. Oh, really? That's good news. Who is she? She is the Princess of Kashi. A princess, good. It's a fitting match for you. Where did you meet her? Oh, I haven't actually met her, but I saw her picture. A picture, that's good. Where is it? It's actually a picture of her about 15 years ago, and it's down in our cellar. Oh, the minister, something clicked in his memory. He said, the Princess of Kashi, a picture 15 years ago. Can you take me to that picture? So he takes that minister down to the cellar and shows him, here is the picture. This is the princess. And I'm sure she's my age now. She's a princess. I can marry her, and I'll be happy only if I marry her. I'll be unhappy if I cannot marry her. And the minister looks at the picture, the portrait, and he says to the prince, Prince, you need to sit down. Sit down. That is not the Princess of Kashi. Well, whoever she is, I'll marry her and nobody else. No, Prince. That is not the Princess of Kashi. And he narrates the whole history of the play and how he was, as a little boy, was dressed up as the Princess of Kashi, and how the portrait came to be painted, and said, Prince, this is not the Princess of Kashi. That thou art. You are that. So what happened to the prince's desire for the Princess of Kashi? It immediately disappears. Why does it disappear? He realizes there is no Princess of Kashi except he himself. It is he who is appearing as the Princess of Kashi. So now notice a few things about this interesting story. One, the Princess of Kashi seems to be different from the prince. It seems to be different. It's a princess, looks different. So the prince thinks that there is a separate Princess of Kashi. It is very attractive. So the prince wants to get the Princess of Kashi. And also it is true that there is no Princess of Kashi apart from the prince. The idea of a separate existence out there of a Princess of Kashi was illusion. It is also true, the moment the illusion was corrected and the prince realized, I am that, and that is nothing apart from me. That one and I have always been one reality. There is nothing there that I had to desire or add to myself. So the picture is still there. It still looks the same. The prince now has the realization, I am that Princess of Kashi. The world is our Princess of Kashi. Swami Vivekananda said, the world is, things are dead in themselves. We breathe life into them. Then we run after them or we run away from them. Similarly, the world is just pictures, names and forms appearing on the canvas of consciousness. And we give them a separate existence. We do not know that. Why do we know? Why do we fall into this illusion of a separate world? Because we do not know ourselves as consciousness. The moment we know ourselves as consciousness, then next we will realize everything that appears in consciousness is we ourselves. Now you see, what we did in the morning is not Advaita. I was not tricking you. It's a necessary step in Advaita, but it is not Advaita. Notice that we realized we are not the body, not the mind. We are this consciousness, which is the witness of the changing body and mind and of the external universe. But it is not non-duality. It's still duality. I am consciousness, and apart from me, there is this mind with its myriad thoughts and sensations. There is this body, and there's this external, vast external universe with millions and billions of entities. How is it not two? It's a universe of multiplicity, a pluralistic universe out there. It's not non-duality, but it's an essential step towards non-duality. Sankhya and yoga philosophy stop here in appreciating that we are pure consciousness apart from this material pluralistic universe. Advaita goes further. Advaita asks the question, it is true that the seer is separate from the seen. The seer is separate from the seen. Drashta is separate from drishya. But ask yourself the question, is the seen separate from the seer? Is drishya separate from drashta? What kind of question is that? If one thing is separate from the other, it's obvious that the other will be separate from the first thing. If I say the pen and the book, so the book and the pen are separate from each other. So the book is separate from the pen. What sense does it make to ask if the pen is separate from the book? Obviously, the two are separate from each other. But this is not the only case. The other possibility is, consider a clay pot. So surely the clay is separate from the pot. In what sense? In the sense that before it was a pot, it was still clay, maybe a lump of clay. And when it is a pot, it's still clay in the form of a pot. When one day the pot is broken, it's still clay in the form of the potsherds, the fragments of the pot. So clay exists and clay need not be a pot. But is the pot something separate from the clay? Can the pot ever be anything other than the clay in the clay pot? No. If you take the clay away from the pot, will anything of the pot remain? Will a ghostly pot shape hang in the air? No. So the pot, which is a particular shape of the clay, that cannot exist without the clay. And if the pot does not exist without the clay, what does the name pot refer to? To nothing. The function of the pot, you can put water in the pot. Will the function still exist without the shape of the pot? No. Without the clay? No. So the name, form, and function in Sanskrit, nama, rupa, vyavahara, they all depend on the clay. Apart from the clay, they are nothing. This is what is meant by the illusoriness of the universe. What we regard as this universe is an appearance in consciousness, is names in consciousness, and is function, transactions in consciousness. And these transactions, names, and forms have no existence apart from you, the consciousness. Therefore, the world is an appearance in consciousness. See, what Advaita Vedanta does is this. You are consciousness, the self, Atma. And everything apart from you, everything that we consider to be an other apart from ourself, the Atma, in Sanskrit, Anatma, not self. The question is, what is the status of the not self? Advaita Vedanta cannot deny, nobody can deny that you are experiencing the other, that you're seeing other people and things. Who can deny that? That you are seeing, you're experiencing your own body. Who can deny that? You're experiencing thoughts and feelings. Who can deny that? Descartes couldn't deny it. In fact, that was the whole basis of his proof, that I experience my thoughts, therefore I exist. So Advaita, like any other philosophy, rational philosophy, cannot deny that we experience an other, that we experience the not self, that we experience objects. Not denied, cannot be denied. What Advaita denies, and this is crucial, is the reality of the not self, is the independent existence of the not self. The not self, the world, the body, the mind, apart from consciousness, do they exist? Or is it consciousness alone appearing as the not self? Is it the self alone appearing as the not self? Is it the prince alone appearing as the princess of Kashi? If you say the not self exists, the world and universe and everything and the people, bodies, they exist apart from consciousness, you have the Sankhya position. Consciousness and a material universe. But Advaita goes to, has an entirely different approach to it, that what we consider to be the not self is an appearance in consciousness. So basically, the question is, what is the relationship of consciousness with its objects? Relationship between subject and object, relationship between consciousness and matter. 5 options were explored in ancient Indian philosophy. So the question is, you are consciousness. How do we know that? Refer back to what we did in the first half in the morning, the classes in the morning. Now I am consciousness. And all this which is appearing to me, what's my relationship with that? What is the relationship of consciousness to its objects? Basically, relationship of consciousness and matter. This is the question. And 5 options were explored in ancient Indian philosophy, just to situate where Advaita Vedanta is going, what Advaita Vedanta wants to say about this whole thing. One option is consciousness is there and matter is there. One option is consciousness is a product of matter. Consciousness is produced by matter. Who said that? The ancient Indian materialists, the Charvakas said that. And just about all of mainstream science today says that. That matter and energy, time and space, that's the only reality there is. And over time, this matter organized itself into more complex forms, and living matter, organic matter, living matter, life emerged from matter. And that life became, through a process of Darwinian evolution, ever more complex and evolved brains and nervous systems. And those nervous systems and brains somehow, operative word here is somehow, we don't know how, somehow they produce consciousness. So consciousness is a Johnny come lately, is a late evolution. It's really matter which is fundamental. In fact, there was a time when there was no consciousness. It's no question of consciousness being prior to matter. It is matter which produces consciousness. There are problems with this. Though it's the mainstream view, the big problem with this is this is no explanation. And right now, the whole question of the hard problem of consciousness. How does a lump of matter, living matter, complex living matter, the biological living brain, how does it generate consciousness? Clearly, there is some connection, because when you think, when we when we have any kind of mental movement, there is a corresponding movement, there's corresponding electrical activity in the neurons of the brain. But that's just correlation. How do those little sparks of electricity in the neurons of the brain become thoughts, feelings, emotions, conscious experiences? No idea. Nobody has any idea. Lots of theories, none of them are making any kind of progress. The second option is that matter emerges from consciousness. One option is that consciousness emerges from matter, materialist. The other option is matter emerges from consciousness. Who says that? All theistic religions. When in theistic religions, in Christianity or Judaism or Islam, or in the Hindu theistic religions like Vaishnavism or Shaktism, we say that God created the universe. What you mean is a conscious being created the universe. So basically, consciousness produces the universe, is a creator of the universe. That's another view. That, by the way, is not the Advaitic view at all. Then the third view is neither produce the other. They are all eternal fundamental realities. There is matter, there is consciousness, and they interact with each other. That is the view of Kapila, the first philosopher, Sankhya, on which the yoga philosophy is based. And in fact, I would like to say that right now, the latest discussions in the hard problem of consciousness in consciousness studies, they're talking about panpsychism. Consciousness is a fundamental reality of the universe, which is basically what poor old Kapila was saying 5,000 years ago, that consciousness is a fundamental reality, as is the universe, and they interact, but they are independent realities. So that's the third view. The fourth view is that neither is ultimately real. This is one variety of Buddhism, that matter and consciousness, they depend on each other, but ultimately both are empty. What lies beyond, they won't say. So That's one view. Again, oversimplifying a little bit. But the fifth view is what I'm going to talk about, Advaita Vedanta. Consciousness is the reality, and you are that. And matter is an appearance in that reality. It's like, you can say, matter is the dream of consciousness. Let's put it poetically. Consciousness appears as matter within itself. Look at it this way. Is this universe appearing to you or in you? So to you would be like this book and the pen. The pen and the book are separate. In this way, are you consciousness and the universe separate, and the universe is coming and appearing to you? Well, there is no proof of that. To prove that, you would have to experience a universe apart from consciousness. But logically, experiencing something apart from consciousness is not possible. All experience depends on consciousness. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So we have Bill here, Bill Conrad, who is our senior most member. He's a retired physicist and the Second World War veteran and all of that. And he's 96, all of 96 years old. So he has a question. He says, how do you say that the universe exists, does not exist apart from consciousness? Let us do an experiment. Swami, let's put a camera in the room, and then we'll press the record button, and let's all leave the room. All of us conscious beings will leave the room. And when we come back, I can assure you, Swami, when you look at the recording, the room will still be there in the absence of all conscious beings. So how do you say the room exists only in consciousness? If all consciousness is drained out of the room, we take consciousness away from the room, all living beings leave the room is still existing. That is a misunderstanding. So I said to him, Bill, the room you experience in your consciousness, the camera you experience in your consciousness, the experiment is set up in your consciousness. You leave the room, you are conscious of leaving the room. You are conscious of re-entering the room. You are conscious of a camera recording. You are conscious of pressing the play button. And in your consciousness, the camera shows you an empty room recording there. You know, the whole thing is still in consciousness. Where did you step out of consciousness for even one bit? Why this seems to be that consciousness is something separate from matter is because we identify ourselves strongly with the body. If I am the body and consciousness is something in me, then it is true that this physical universe will become a separate reality from me. Clearly, there are other bodies. If I am the mind, clearly there are other minds. But if I am consciousness, how would you say clearly there is something else? Because it is all there in consciousness. What Advaita says is, we are not bodies with consciousness. We are not minds with consciousness. We are consciousness in which bodies and minds appear. So that's Advaita's claim. This is called the world illusion. By world illusion, we mean the world, the universe, including bodies and minds, they all appear in consciousness, and you are that one consciousness. So I'll talk more about that next time. I think we have a little bit of time for questions and answers. This is something that is more easily understood by discussion. I'm sure you have like a torrent of questions. So, this is what Advaita Vedanta, in fact, is often summed up in a very famous statement. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jiva Brahmaiva Napara. In our terms, consciousness is the only reality. The world is an appearance in consciousness. What about me? Am I real or an appearance? You are none other than consciousness. So consciousness, by here consciousness, I mean pure consciousness. Consciousness itself is the only reality in which the world appears, and you are none other than consciousness. There could be many questions, but I won't anticipate them. I'll let you ask them.
Will you begin with Swami Sarvapriyananda? Maharaj, you have a question.
Yes. This is following from what you've just been saying in this class, and that is, could you talk about the difficulty, the impossibility perhaps, of showing that there is any existence outside of consciousness? What I mean is, just so that you can you understand what I'm talking about and can therefore answer it, is if, like in Bill Conrad's problem about the camera being in the room and so forth, if there is no being, no consciousness whatsoever, conscious of something, does that thing exist? It's like the old question, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one to hear it, was there sound? Was there even a tree falling? Where there is, can you show that there's some possibility of existence outside of consciousness? I guess that's the question.
Right. There is no possibility of that. That question arises because we do not distinguish, we fail to distinguish between consciousness and knowledge. So in this entire world which we experience a part of it as known and the rest of it as unknown. Right now, for example, I'm sitting right here. I'm looking at the computer and all of you on my screen, and I'm sort of peripherally aware of the room and sort of just barely aware outside the room there are buildings and trees, and very vaguely aware that there is Manhattan outside and New York and the whole of the United States and the whole of the world, just vaguely, sort of almost theoretically aware of it. There may be millions and billions of entities in there, which I'm not aware of. So how can one claim that it's all in my consciousness? It is not all in my knowledge. Knowledge is a very narrow band thing. But notice, everything, whatever you can talk about, think about, conceive about, it's already in some sense in your awareness, in your consciousness. I'll give you another example. In our dreams, when you're dreaming, perhaps you're meeting with a friend or having a cup of coffee, and in the dream, you are aware of just a little slice of one person and a cup of coffee and talking, maybe something is going on just for a few moments. But even in the dream, there is the vague notion of a vast world existing all around you. We never dream in this way that I'm talking with one person and we're hanging in empty space. That would be a very strange dream. We dream of a whole universe. So in our dream, an entire universe is there, which we do not know. And I can assure you, if anybody asked you a philosophical question that, how do you know there are things? And the moment you turned around this way and that way, you would see things. You would see people and trees and things going on. If you looked up, you would see a sky. If you looked down, you would see the earth. And yet, all of it would be nothing other than the dreamer's mind. The dreamer's mind in the dream splits itself into a knower and the known, into a knowing person in the dream. You are yourself there in your dream. You are the knower. And you know only a slight part of the whole universe dreamt up. The more you investigate, the more you'll find different parts of that universe. And yet, there will be nothing in that dream except the mind of the dreamer. Consider a virtual universe created by a powerful virtual reality machine. Nowadays, more and more powerful things are there. In that universe, you're clear that the computer is generating everything. But if you go into the virtual universe, they call them avatars. So you can have like a little virtual creature which can walk around. And when you walk around in that, you will see parts of that virtual universe, though the whole thing is still existing in the projection of that machine. Something like the Matrix movie, I think. So consciousness projects this entire universe and we experience slices of it as knowers. And yet the rest of the universe still exists in consciousness. One way would be to think of it as existing in a cosmic mind, what in Vedanta calls the Hiranyagarbha, and we are tiny parts of the cosmic mind knowing only parts of the world illusion, and yet the whole thing would still be in consciousness. Another way, radical way, it is what is called Drishti Shrishtivada, is you, as you experience, the universe sort of pops into experience, into objecthood as you keep on experiencing. So that's one way of looking at it. Are there...
Lakshmi, go ahead and unmute. Call out the name.
Yeah.
Is there anybody who's asked questions? Or,
Lakshmi,
or I can ask.
Yeah, I'm trying
or take up some more
to
questions.
unmute, but not.
Hi. Hello, Swamiji.
Yes.
Yeah. So One of the things I've been listening to your talks very regularly and have been practicing as much as I can as well. So one of the paradoxical statements in understanding consciousness or the concentration itself is, uh, I feel at least is, which I need your guidance on, is during the act of concentration, uh, what is the state of our eternal consciousness or awareness itself? Because if I'm being aware of being concentrated, that seems very a paradoxical statement, because concentrated is a single streamed focused a state of mind. But if I'm aware of that state, it breaks the flow of concentration. And
Correct.
this is also referenced by Vivekananda in his Raja Yoga book, actually, while I was trying to follow that. So that's where a little struggle comes in trying to be in a concentrated state.
Right. Remember, concentration is a function of the mind, and it's also it's also lit up by consciousness. Consciousness is always there. So it's not that we are concentrating consciousness. It's not that we are becoming more conscious. Here, language fails us. Where language would say we become more conscious. It's that we are becoming more mindful of something. We are focusing consciousness, actually. Training attention. In the morning, Swami mentioned that attention is actually nothing other than consciousness. So it's attention is consciousness focused by, sort of channelized by the mind. Sometimes the mind does a good job holding on to one object at a time. Sometimes it brings out variety of objects when we say we have lost concentration or we have lost focus. Whether the mind is focused or not, consciousness, the self, is still the same. It's helpful to think of it as just bare existence. Does a focused mind exist? Yes, of course. If it doesn't exist, it would just pop out of existence. Does a restless mind exist? Of course it exists. So in the same way, consciousness is exactly the same whether the mind is restless or whether the mind is focused. Now I understand your question. This question arises out of inability to distinguish between mind and consciousness. Um, when you say I'm focusing on something, and when I try to become aware of that, I'm losing that focus. So it's actually, when you try to become aware of that, you're using the mind to become aware of that, and therefore the mind loses its initial focus. Think about it this way. Don't try to do that. Think about it this way. When I'm entirely focused on something, not at all thinking about Vedanta, not at all trying to become aware of awareness, nothing like that. At that time also, is awareness there? Is consciousness there? Or have I become unconscious? Consciousness is there. That's what is shining. That's what reveals to you the object of your intense laser-like focus. You don't have to do anything about consciousness. See, once we begin to learn about ourselves as pure consciousness, there's a great natural desire and an impulse to do something about it. That I will try to realize myself as consciousness. One, I will try to experience myself as consciousness. I will try to stay as consciousness. I will try to stay as the witness. So one sadhu said, "Ye sakshi, ye to nakli sakshi hai. This is an artificial witness. This is a pretense witness. It's a practice. It's not the real witness consciousness. The real witness consciousness, you cannot experience it as an object, no matter how much you try. You cannot not stay in it, no matter how much you try. If you think I've totally forgotten Vedanta, I'm completely immersed and very restless and unhappy in the world. According to Advaita Vedanta, you are the same pure witness consciousness as Ramana Maharshi and Swami Vivekananda and anybody else. It's just that it's the mind which has taken over. Notice, when the mind is calm and meditative and thinking about witness consciousness, you know it. When the mind is restless and you cannot concentrate and it's disturbed, unhappy, you know it. That you, who knows this unhappy state of the mind, completely unfocused state of the mind, and the meditative, Vedantic, holding on Vedantic thoughts, that state of the mind, you are not attached to any of this. You are permanent. That is what is meant by witness consciousness.
Next question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Utpal.
Yeah, namaste.
Namaste.
So my question is, what is ego's role on the whole self-inquiry project? Like whenever I try to be the drishta, I end up being identified as the ego as the drishta, like kind of a cognizance, there's a lower mind, the ego. Like then, how can I overcome to be the real drishta actually? Like
Right.
it's kind of a whole mind game. Like
Yes, yes. It is entirely within the mind. And the real drashta, the witness consciousness, is not within the mind. So the mind cannot grasp it. You have to let go of that effort to grasp it. Then what can we do? The question from Bharat earlier, Bharat, and your question, it is the same thing I want to say. What can we do? Put our effort at seeing what we are not. What we are will become self-luminously obvious. You can never actually try to grasp it because it's you. So one specific answer to your question about the ego, what's the role of the ego? In fact, the role of the ego is very well defined and this psychology is entirely borrowed from Sankhya and Yoga. Ego is called Abhimanatmika Antakarana Vritti. So all sorts of functions go on in the mind and in the body. So one function of the mind is what is called the appropriating function, which integrates everything into one unity. I am thinking, I am happy, I am sad, I'm learning, I'm walking, talking. All the functions of the body and mind, they're integrated by one function of the mind, which is called the ego. It's a function of the mind. The whole point in Sankhya, Yoga, Vedanta is it's not you. You are the witness of the ego. Now, the I, the word by which we refer to ourselves. I is the word by which we refer to. Book is a word which refers to this book. I is the word which refers to ourselves. Right now, the I refers to the ego, a function of the mind which integrates the activities of the body mind. And it's sort of what the word is appropriation. Abhiman is appropriation. It takes unto itself. There's a thought in the mind that happiness, I am happy. There's a sensation of hunger in the stomach. But what does that ego do? I am hungry. So it integrates everything. But it's still just a function of the mind. So this function of the body mind, we identify ourselves with it. I refers to that now. As long as the I refers to the ego is totally connected with body mind. So I will always think I am body mind. The I referring to ego means automatically I will feel I am body mind. What Advaita Vedanta tries to do, in fact, Sankhya also tries to do the same thing. It pushes the reference of the I back to the witness consciousness. What does I is a thought in the mind, and that refers to the ego, but the real I is the witness consciousness. So when you say Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, instead of I, the ego connected with body mind, I am Brahman, the existence consciousness. Not to say it or believe it, it's an obvious luminous experience. It's a permanent shift in the reference of the I. In Panchadashi it is there. The term I means three things. Two things to the enlightened person and one thing to the unenlightened. To our unenlightened state, the I means only one thing, that is the ego. I means ego, ahankara. This is the I, what else? And the ego directly means body mind. Ego is connected with body mind. That's the function of the ego after all, to coordinate the body mind. But for the enlightened persons, I means two things. So I means, the direct meaning of I for an enlightened person is I am Brahman. It's a thought in the mind, but it points to Brahman. So I am Brahman. This is very true. An enlightened person can honestly claim this. And the second thing that I means for the enlightened person is, indirectly, it means body mind in order to interact with the rest of us. So when Sri Ramakrishna used them in both senses, he would say this place, referring to the body mind as a thing, not himself. And sometimes he would say, I will drink water. I will drink water, or I will go to Calcutta. Who will go to Calcutta? Not pure consciousness. It is just this body mind which goes there. But now in identification with the body mind, in order to interact with the rest of us, the enlightened person can also behave just like us, better than us in fact, and talk just like we talk. In fact, in Advaita Vedanta, it is emphasized, after understanding all of this, keep your language transactional, the way it is used in normal day-to-day life. Do not refer to yourself as pure consciousness. I have had people, enthusiastic people, writing to me saying after a long email about how he's wonderful, he has understood Advaita Vedanta, and then signing off as that eternal pure consciousness, in this case, shining through the body and mind of Mr. Mishra. You don't have to say all of that. You can just say, I am Mr. Mishra. Advaita Vedanta says an enlightened person can act exactly like that. There's no problem. So 3 senses of the word I. 1, body mind through the ego for the unenlightened. 2, I am Brahman, or indirectly just for interacting with us through the body mind also.
Go ahead, Purnima. Purnima, go ahead.
Okay. Namaste, Swamiji. My question is this, like different schools of thought like Sankhya, Yoga, Advaita, they describe realities in different ways. But for a yogi or a jnani, the absolute reality should be the same, isn't it? Okay, for an intellectual thought process, it can be different, I understand. But when a yogi realizes or a Advaitin realizes the reality, for both of them, it should be the same single reality. Yes. That's then why there should be an argument? They all should come to a single.
Yes. So there is one reality. It is true. Just because our philosophies are different, reality will not change to suit our philosophies, right? So there are 2 answers to this. The Advaitin will say the yogi and the Sankhyan have seen only part of the reality. You see, we did 2 things today. In the morning session, we said, I'm not the body, not the mind, I'm the witness of the body mind. Now the Advaitin will say, the yogi is somebody who has done, or Sankhyan is somebody who has done only the morning session. But in the afternoon session, we said, the universe, the world, and the body and the mind, they're all appearances in one consciousness. So there's only consciousness. In the first session, we said consciousness and other things, a dualistic philosophy. We stopped there. But can you go further and ask that question? All these things you are seeing, are they appearances in consciousness, or are they real things apart from consciousness? If you say they are appearances in consciousness, then they are nothing other than consciousness. So there's only consciousness alone. The Advaitin would claim superiority. That's how they do, that it is a further, deeper analysis. But it also need not be so. You see, it's not only yogi and Advaitin. There are dualists. There are theistic people who say none of these things. They say the reality is that this world is there and there is a separate heaven, God is there and we will go to God. Are they all wrong? Not necessarily. The infinite nature of reality is such that the way you approach it, you will experience it in that way. It is the old story, old Indian story of 5 men who touched, the blind men who touched the elephant. Some said the elephant is like a pillar who touched the foot of the elephant. Some said it's like a rope who touched the tail of the elephant. Some said it's like a pipe or something who touched the trunk of the elephant, and so on. Some said it's like a leaf, big leaf, like who touched the ear of the elephant. And they argued among each other because they were experiencing different aspects of a bigger reality. So Sri Ramakrishna would say this thing, that the reality is not limited by Dvaita or Advaita, not even by yoga or even Advaita is not all of it. And Advaita actually agrees. Gaudapada in the Mandukya Karika, he says, Dvaitam icchanti kechana, Advaitam icchanti chapare, Dvaita Dvaita vivarjitam tattvam. Some people prefer a dualistic model. Some people prefer non-dualism. He's himself the arch non-dualist, Gaudapada. But he says the reality escapes both dualism and non-dualism. But there you cannot use language. At most language can do is somewhere come close to non-dualism. Beyond that, language cannot function at all. So we can leave it at that. Sri Ramakrishna would say, all of these paths are right. Notice another thing. What are they all trying to do? They're all trying to get liberation. From what? From suffering. So if you stay at the yogic Kaivalya or Sankhyan Kaivalya, are you liberated from suffering? Yes. So they have achieved their goal. They are free of suffering. And the Advaitin, if you get that enlightenment, are you free of suffering? Yes. The dualist who experiences God and heaven and Narayana living in Vaikuntha, has that person transcended suffering? Yes. In that sense, they've all achieved their goal. So this is a very vast, all-encompassing view which Hinduism has, and especially in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, we find this.